Well, I read a kind of blurb for the book Philosophical Semantics, Reintegrating Theoretical Philosophy. Well, here it goes. The idea of writing a book called Philosophical Semantics I had more than 30 years ago as I was writing a thesis on Wittgenstein in Germany. In the time, I was exasperated with Kripke's brilliant, but to a great extent implausible, views, and thinking that Ernst Tugendhat's analysis of singular predicative statements was not only correct, but able to be developed further. According to this analysis, the sense of a predicative singular sentence is given by its verification rule, which is applied by the application of the identification rule of the singular term, to which is added later the application rule of the general term, what constitutes, according to him, correspondence. And I later tried to show how it really constitutes correspondence. Years later, I had some ideas to improve the view. I wrote some papers regarding aspects of the problem, but in the end, the original project was almost forgotten. In fact, I think some ideas remain unconscious, deciding the paths one follows. Thus, in the last 4 years, I decided to write a book which has now almost 500 pages, for me to an unexpected, unparalleled kind of work, a kind of patient addition of argumentative Darwinian accumulation of evidence. Although the analysis of the singular statements form the dorsal spine of the book, its scope is much wider. It begins with a methodological chapter showing why some kind of Murian commonsensical intuitions should not be let down so easily, but normally seen as points of departure able to be extended by science. This is followed by a Tugendhatian reconstructive examination of Wittgenstein's and Frege's semantic insights, together with a criticism of Kripke and the new orthodoxy that followed his work. There is a chapter defending semantic verificationism, showing how wrong were the positivists and post-positivist philosophers like Quine in the criticism of their own distorted forms of verificationism, different from Wittgenstein's original idea. The idea of that the sense of a statement is the method of its verification comes from Wittgenstein, and but people forget this. After a renewed defense of an ontology of tropes that is incorporated in the book as the fundamental ontology that is assumed by the book, after a renewed defense of a higher order view of existence, understood as the warranted applicability of conceptual rules. This is a way you can reverse this too. After an, in my view, very convincing defense of facts as truth makers, showing why Strauss was wrong, and even after an answer to Hume's problem of induction, the book ends with a full-blooded defense of the correspondence theory of truth that includes coherence as a mechanism to achieve correspondence and extends correspondence to formal science, and this within a verifiability theory of factual meaning. Well, finally, the analysis of correspondence leads to the problem of perception and even of skepticism. The problem of skepticism is dealt with. The book is an attempt to reintegrate philosophy, challenging the present mainstream philosophy language, and the negative sides of the scientific and fragmented ways philosophy is presently made, not against the positive sides. The strategy of divide and to conquer is useful, has its place, but there is the negative side. The views are too much fragmented, and you cannot have and you need to. It is off-gap work of philosophy, ideal of philosophy to get a unified view. Well, but to get it rightly, and this is hard work. The book is an attempt to reintegrate philosophy, as I said, and its ideas are, if its ideas are correct, then to a great extent the present philosophy of language is misleading as a research program, because the new formalist orthodoxy is scientific in a reductionist way, failing to consider the issues from a broader perspective. I think that the things told in the book are not difficult to see when people are looking from the right perspective and in the right way, since it is based on a very plausible thought, often very plausible, though often forgotten views. Hence, my job was to select, develop, and associate these views in the right way, what in fact demanded to me, a poor, limited guy, some decades. Since I am an outsider, an SP, living most of the time in northeast of Brazil and without any chance of being published by great publishers, they refused even to evaluate a strange project written by an unknown researcher coming from nowhere. I feel myself forced to do something against the possibility that this book disappears without any trace, covered by a mountain of academic writings. For this reason, I was glad to receive positive endorsements by two German professors, Mr. Peter Stemmer and Wolfgang Spohn. I'm very thankful that they spent some time reading the book, and I think they did it because the Germans still have an idea of what wide-scope systematic philosophy should be. As I was finishing the book, I was afraid I were spinning. It is reassuring to know that if I am insane, at least I am in good company. My last remark is about the strategy of the book. The first thing to be noted is that there are only a few ideas in the analytic philosophy that are prima facie plausible. Most of them, though sometimes very smart, creative, and even relevant to other goals, they can be very challenging. This is so in the history of philosophy. For example, Hume. No one believes in Hume's conclusions, but it is challenging and dialectically important for example, Reid. Well, now, most, though some are smart, creative, and even relevant to other goals, and seems more or less implausible. Now, assuming that the few prima facie plausible ideas are indeed the true ones, we can do the following. First, defend and develop them as far as we can. Second, try to see how they can be related to one another, to see how they fit together in the case they really fit together. Surprisingly, it was not very difficult to find these relations, what reinforced my assumption of consilience. This was the strategy unconsciously applied to the construction of the book. The result was a systematic work with a very broad philosophical scope, whose surprising plausibility is based on its internal coherence. Of course, it was a speculative enterprise, but it seems to be essentially true. Even if the views were all wrong, I don't wish to dismiss any possibility. It would be interesting to understand why they seem to be so true. And this is what I had to read.